Greetings, Guzzlers. Now, something I came across quite a while ago, I keep meaning to make, is a recipe for crumpets. Now, I think this might be essentially an English type thing. I don't know if you get crumpets anywhere else. But most of them are made using yeast and baking powder. However, this is a recipe from Dan Leopard. I think I picked this up from the bakery bits. They have a section on their different recipes, and I thought, oh, I want to make these. And it utilises their stainless steel crumpet rings, and also the Welsh baking stone, which is not actually made of stone, but there you go. And although I've still yet to use this, I've bought it for two purposes. One, in the oven to cook like pizzas and bread on, but I've never done it like that yet. The other, it's rattling there, and the other is for doing something like this on the stove top, making traditional Welsh cakes, which again I'm going to give a go. But in this case we're making crumpets. And Dan says rather than using the traditional yeast and baking powder, he does it using spent sourdough. And it can be either sort of fresh, as in, you know, you've just fed it and it's gone through its bubbling up cycle, or it can even be a couple of days old. So this is actually a couple of days old one. Okay. But we're not actually adding that yet. We're going to start by autolysing, or I don't know how they want to pronounce it these days. Who cares? Our flours. Now, I've got 225 grams of just plain white flour. And then in here, I've got 40 grams of emmer wheat flour. Now, you could use spelt, you could use wheat, whatever you like, wholemeal. I've got some emmer, so I'm going to use that. So that's going to go in there, and we're just going to mix that together. Now, at this stage, we don't need to get anything else ready, because we're just going to let this autolyse with some cold water. Cold water, I've got 370 grams of that, and we're going to pour that into there. And this is like a batter. It's not really a dough as such. It's much more like a batter. And if you know what your traditional crumpet is, it's, I suppose in a way, it's like a, I was going to say a flatbread, but then that gives you totally the wrong idea. But it's full of holes. Holes that you can see on top, holes when you cut it inside. Nothing better than a nice hot toasted crumpet with butter on. So, you can see it's almost like a pancake batter. Or do I say Yorkshire pudding batter? Probably get told it nothing like that one. Right, so I think that's pretty well mixed. So now what he suggests you do is we just let it rest from about 20 minutes to an hour. Now, he said it won't actually make any difference if you leave it any longer, but it won't do it any harm either. So I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes, and then we'll start preparing the other ingredients, which I have pre-weighed out, but I'll tell you about them in a second. While that's doing its business, the other ingredients. We've got some fine sea salt. I've got 2 grams of that. I've got 15 grams brown sugar, 15 grams of baking powder, 75 grams of that sourdough starter, and 5 grams of malt vinegar, or he says you can use cider vinegar. I've used malt. You're going to want a dish with some flour in, or a bowl should I say, because what we're going to do, we're going to butter the inside of our crumpet rings and then flour them, because we don't want this crumpet mixture sticking to it. Equally, we will want to grease our baking stone, but again, still not ready to heat that up yet. We do that on the stove top, he says about a medium heat, but we're not ready for that yet, because once we've let that rest, then we've added that, it's then going to have another sort of about half-hour-ish rest, and at which point we want to make sure we then be ready with the stone. About 20 minutes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put that onto about a medium heat. Put that on there, and now I've got to be very careful about, now that's hot, when that gets hot, that's going to be very hot, don't touch it. I've got to be careful with my knob there that I don't accidentally touch that. Now we're going to want to lightly oil or grease the surface. Yeah, I might just do it this way, add a little bit, and then just on there like that. And then, like I said, what we want to do is we want to grease the inside with butter. Our rings, they're non-stick, they're not non-stick rings, sorry. These are just their heavy duty carbon steel ones. And then we just want to generously coat them in flour. Now, when that is hot, which I'm not quite sure how we'll tell, other than that, but it might start smoking, who knows. Like I say, this is my first sort of test of this baking stone. Getting butter everywhere. That goes in there. Now I've got some water ready for washing these rings, because remember, like I said, we want to wash them off, letting them cool a little bit first. And the other thing is, what we might want to get hold of is some tongs. Can't find the original tongs, might have to use, where are they gone? Lost them. Oh well, might have to do it carefully with a cloth, I think. So, here goes nothing. So we stand our rings on there. Ooh, a lot of flour come off that one. I should knock that one a bit harder. And we're just going to give them a minute to warm up. Okay. I think actually that stone's not quite hot enough yet anyway. And then, like I say, we're going to pour that batter in there to just under halfway. Right, let's give this a go. Did make a bit of a sizzle then. And so now, perhaps not quite hot enough. It did make that hiss as such when I went in there. And now we're going to let it cook for at least 5 minutes. I'm going to put 6 on the clock and we'll see how we go. And then, like I said, if we start seeing any bubbles come nearer the top, like I can see one there, although I think at this stage we need to let it cook through a bit more, because all that's happening is they're just filling up. But what you'll find is as it sort of starts cooking the batter, and so it's starting to solidify more, this time when you prick the bubbles, they should stay as like little holes. We are starting to get a lot more up here now. Particularly this one, which I think is more under there. But having said that, the heat should spread evenly on that stone. I'll just keep myself not to touch the bloody thing. I can feel the heat from it now. It is rising slightly. So, rather than sitting and watching crumpets rise, when it's getting a bit nearer that end of that cooking time, I'll come back to you and show the rest. We are getting a lot more bubbles appearing now. I don't know how well you can see it from there, but it's not, this one's almost to the top, this one's not far behind it now. A lot more bubbles appearing on the surface of this one. Oops. A lot more bubbles on the surface of this one. This one not so much at the moment, but again I think that's partly because the main heating element is more under that. Right, when I poke them holes, I can feel that underneath it is much more solid. So and you can notice actually some of these bubbles start popping as I just help to set this top a bit. So just pricking some of them holes. It's feeling like a skid. They're still a little bit wet under some of that. So I suspect these might want finishing off. Yeah, that's still quite wet, that one. It's going to need finishing off. What I might try and do is flip them over actually. Right, I've extracted them. However, I think one thing that was apparent was I need to make sure that's oiled much better. The one nearest the camera actually stuck to the bottom, and when I lifted it up, or tried to lift it up, it literally sort of ripped it. So it sort of come apart. They're still very doughy as well. They do feel like crumpets, but what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to put that one on there for a bit longer. This one was still a bit wet inside. Okay, it's definitely not cooked. So I think that's a reject. Hopefully this one is going to be a little bit better. They do seem a lot more bready than that's raw dough, that bit. They do seem a lot more bready than our standard crumpets that we'd buy. Oh, it's a bit of a crust, that. So I'm just going to clean up my rings and we'll try a second batch. I also think they possibly weren't quite hot enough to begin with when we first put it on there. Right, this was the last one. Didn't have a lot of batter left for that one, so it's a bit thinner. Still warm. Let's just spread it with a bit of butter. Probably been a bit too generous with the butter there. Cut one of the earlier ones in half. A little bit more doughy normally than we'd normally sort of see, but you can see sort of the texture. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to, I've turned the heat off, but in the residual heat I'm just going to warm them through. But let's try this one. It's a bit more like a blini, I think. A bit generous with the butter on that one. It is very much like a crumpet. The texture on your tongue is very much like a crumpet is normally. The flavour is. I do get a slight hint of sourness. I don't know if that's vinegar, to be honest. I'm not sure we really get much from that sourdough, but then bear in mind we put the starter culture in there and it didn't really have a lot of time to carry on fermenting, the flour. So I suspect it was more just a way of helping to get rid of discard. But there you go. Homemade sourdough crumpets, courtesy. All right, mate, all right. Courtesy of Dan Leopard from the Bakery Bits recipe page.